Hey everybody, this is Mitch Stein from Pond. We are working to get our video of all of our guests live. We're having some tech issues with the platform, but we're going to get started audio only. So listen up, and hopefully you'll be able to see our faces soon. We have an awesome group assembled to talk about this topic today, and we're really excited to dig into it. Quickly, before I just wanted to give a quick overview. My name is Mitch Stein. I'm the CEO and co-founder here at Pond. Pond is the only place where nonprofits get paid to discover business solutions. You can think of us like an Angie's List where you can post a need, we'll match you with a potential solution through our site. But we don't only match you with solutions, we actually pay you to engage with our potential vendors. While you're figuring out what technology or service person is right for you, you're earning money towards that thing that's going to help your organization thrive. And we host weekly webinars like this one, where you can actually get paid for attending and giving us feedback at the end of the day. So we'll share that URL with you to give us some feedback. And we can't wait to dig in on nonprofit donor data as our topic today. It's a huge one. We only have an hour. And here we are. Great. It's great to see everyone here. We have an awesome group assembled, and I'm going to start passing it around for intros. I'd love for everyone to obviously share who you are and the organization you represent, and also just a few layers of your identity that are important to you as well. And Moishe, you're next to me, so I'll have you kick off here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Moshe Hecht. I am the CEO and co-founder of Hatch. So just a little bit of a background. For the last 8 years, I was a co-founder of a company called Charity.com, which is charity with a D, the first matching crowdfunding platform for nonprofits. Over that 7-8 years, we helped over 6,000 organizations raise over $2 billion through high impact crowdfunding campaigns. About a year ago, I got the COVID bug, the mental one, the emotional one, not the physical one, and decided to step away and to start something new. Hatch is a giving intelligence platform. We use data analytics, some machine learning to help organizations engage deeper with their constituents and to help them raise more money from their constituents. And I am happy and glad to be here with such a wonderful panel.
Awesome. Thank you, Moishe. Wes, you want to go next?
Happy to go next. Cool story, Moishe. I look forward to learning more about what you're doing. My name's Wes. I'm one of the founders of a company called Wisely. We provide predictions to our clients through CRM integrations, and we're predicting how much and when donors will give, and providing advice on how to target your high-end donors, how to approach them, when to approach them, as well as portfolio management. Think of it as an automated prospect researcher guiding your gift officers in the right direction.
Super. Arup, would you like to go?
Sure thing. My name is Arup Banerjee. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Windfall. We are a data and data science company based out of San Francisco and Denver. We work with about 900 nonprofits across the country right now. Been around for about 5.5 years, really helping across the, not too dissimilar from what Wes was mentioning as well, but in terms of predictive modeling, data for wealth screening, and also a lot of tools that nonprofits can use to link their data sets together. So excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Sean?
Hey, Mitch. Great to be here. Appreciate you having me. I'll start on the digging a layer deep under the onion. You're going to see the sunrise behind me. Although I don't look it, I'm originally from Hawaii. My dad's side of the family's 5 generations, but don't feel bad. I come out and most of my family thinks I'm the hired help when I go to the family reunions. So, but I'm sitting on the South Shore of Oahu right now visiting family. So it's not a virtual background, but that's the layer deep on who I am. I'm also the co-founder and CEO of Boodle AI. We are coming up on 6 years this April, so pretty excited about that. And we are an AI-driven leads company. And whether we help organizations find those leads out of prospect lists that they have, helping them narrow in on whether it's major gift donors, monthly recurring donors, growing donors, or just developing de novo new list from the 240 million adult Americans who donate in this country, and helping them find the people who look the most like their current donors.
Awesome. And last but certainly not least, Regina, you want to bring us home with the intros?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Regina Alassane, CEO and founder of Research Pro. I started Research Pro 5 years ago, and my firm I partner with nonprofit leaders to provide development operations, as well as qualified prospect lists to support their multi-million-dollar fundraising campaigns. I'm really thrilled to be here, happy to meet everyone, and to be in a community of data geeks this afternoon. I love it.
Yes, we certainly are going to be geeking out on data, but everyone don't be scared. We'll make sure we're not using any crazy language. We'll be providing 101 definitions and things, as well as building on top of that foundation with some of the latest and greatest tech happening in the sector. If you can't tell, this is like an unbelievable group of leaders in data science for nonprofits. So I cannot wait to dig in. And before we get into some of the more technical, like current modern technology, I think it'd be helpful to set the stage of like what's different today than 10 years ago with regard to the donor data or donor information ecosystem. And Arup, if you want to kick us off there, I know you've been operating in that space for a while.
Sure. Yeah. When we started our business in 2016, we really started with the focus that nonprofits are actually quite data driven. It's been pretty refreshing versus some of the for-profit or commercial counterparts in terms of what that looks like. Now, that being said, about 10 years ago, a lot of folks were still not cloud enabled, still from a processes perspective. I think it's kind of funny hearing everybody's story here in terms of when we all got started, because it's really about democratizing access and ultimately bringing some of those enterprise tools to nonprofits today. So I think that holistically, the difference is, I think, the speed of technology, the integrations, and the tech stack has changed to a certain degree where we actually can take advantage of it. And so ultimately, I believe that still the same premise or the discipline associated with being data driven is still the same. It's just that the tools and the technology has come a far enough way that we're able to really accelerate and provide more recency. So instead of, for example, 10 years ago, you might have done a wealth screening every 3 years. That doesn't have to happen anymore, right? Costs are down. Things on a per record basis are kind of silly or out of loop. Holistically, I think that just we've come a long way in terms of bringing a lot of enterprise tools to the nonprofit community.
Yeah, absolutely. And quickly, I meant to mention to the audience, please introduce yourself. If you've got questions you want us to cover, this is your chance to hear from the pros. So don't be shy. We'll bring those questions right into the conversation as we go. So please don't hesitate to jump into the chat. Wes, I was just going to turn to you if you had anything to add there on kind of the history and where we are today in that context of data science for nonprofits.
Sure. Like if you look at what was happening 10 years ago in the data science space for nonprofits, only the largest organizations could afford or have the infrastructure to actually do anything there. I like to say math has become cheap. And that means that, you can create models and run them, and you can run them every day and to produce, actionable results. And the adoption of technology in the sector is also changing pretty rapidly. So the democratization of technology, something that Pond is helping the nonprofit sector with as well. So thank you there, Mitch. That's making a difference in what you can actually pull off data science wise. The nonprofit sector has been mandated by the government for good record keeping. So generally speaking, their databases are not in horrible shape, at least when it pertains to where people live and their giving history. So it's a great place for data science, and we're seeing lots of different ways that you can do that.
Awesome. And we're definitely going to dig into some of those creative things you're seeing on the front lines. I know all of you are seeing this with your clients. One thing that I know is tricky for people in this realm of data and data tools is like where does everything fit together? I mean, even as all of you described what your specific businesses do, putting myself in a nonprofit shoes, it's a little confusing of where do those work together, what overlaps. Sean, could you help give a little bit of a landscape of what the different kinds of tools you can use around your donor data in addition to your CRM are and what those mean?
Well, I mean, I think the first and foremost is the CRM, and it's finding the right one. And it's interesting. You see a lot of nonprofits that just want to go with the big brand name, and I've seen nonprofits get mired down in trying to do a Salesforce implementation way before they're ready for it. I mean, Salesforce is an amazing CRM, but not for a smaller nonprofit. You talk to, I'm close with Gabe over at Virtuous, and he'll literally advise nonprofits off his CRM to something that's more of a fit with them that's smaller. So I think first and foremost, to get the foundation, you've got to have the right CRM. After that, it's looking at what are the tools that are going to allow you to capture data. I agree with Arup. The nonprofit community has definitely been data driven. At the same time, there are a lot of nonprofits that, especially as they start out, don't focus on that. And Wes is absolutely right. Math has become cheap, and the tools out there to collect data have become a lot easier. So a lot of nonprofits who don't even realize it are leveraging tools that are collecting data for them, which is the very fuel we need to power machine learning algorithms and build AI that's going to give them the insights that they need. And so as they use events platforms or bidding platforms, focusing on those that are going to capture data, that whether they use it immediately or not, it's going to be there. There's a wonderful Chinese proverb that loosely, when asked when's the best time to plant a tree, it's 30 years ago, but the next best time is today. And so as long as they're not looking to plant that tree tomorrow and collecting the data now so that they can leverage it when they're ready to, I think that's the most important when they're looking at the tools that they're going to bring onto their tech stack.
Super helpful. Regina, I know that you go in pretty hands-on with a lot of your clients that may be using some different tools. Do you have a view on where does donor research, donor prospecting, donor analytics, how do you see these things fitting together?
Oh, they all fit together. They're all really under the same umbrella and part of the same operation. And I would just echo what Sean mentioned. Really, the best tool is your CRM. And so we are going to, I have to just say, we do not, I do not condone shadow databases. So the CRM is where everything should live. It's where your donor relationship lives. The story of your donor relationship lives. And yes, there are other tools that you can use, like Windfall, like an iWave, like a donor search, and like a wealth engine, etc. But you need to pull whatever your screening results are, pull the relevant results back into your CRM. Everything should live there. And I see far too many organizations still struggling with that. And when we talk about when is the best time to plant the seed, there are still so many right now that are struggling with getting out of Excel and getting into any type of platform. So I often say, no matter what tool you're using, make sure that you are using your CRM. And pretty much, I strongly believe that, whatever CRM you have and your budget can afford could probably work for you. You just need to really understand the dynamics of it and how to maximize it.
Yeah, super, super helpful. We want to get into some of those next level tools and strategies for sure. But I think before we go there, Moisha, I'd love to get your view on just data strategy as a whole. Where does that belong in the organization? I think sometimes within nonprofits, it's like the Spider-Man meme of everyone pointing at the other Spider-Man of who owns data strategy. Does it sit in fundraising? Is that an IT job? Is that a marketing job? Could you help demystify data strategy a bit for folks?
Sure. Let's break it down. I would break it down into three categories. I would say that you definitely have to have the people who are storing and managing the data. So let's call it, depending on what scale your organization is, you might have one person doing all three of these, or you might have three people doing all three, or you might have 30 people in each one split in. But in terms of the categories, so you have people managing the data. I find with the nonprofits that I've worked with in the past, it's always good to have someone who's really the owner of making sure that because nonprofits are so cloud reliant, and they're doing a crowdfunding campaign over here, and they're doing maybe have a donate button over here, and they're doing a golf outing over here where people are signing it in. So data is coming in from so many different locations. It's always good to have someone who's responsible to make sure. It's like, wait, didn't we do an event? Isn't there a list of like 500 people that we still didn't enter into our CRM? So I think that it's really, really important for nonprofits to have that person who's really the owner of making sure that the data is being stored in the CRM system. I think I would split the next two categories into marketing and major gifts, and both major gifts and the marketing departments should have a data strategy to drive their efficiency. So in terms of major gifts, everyone here is familiar and offers at some level, ways to prospect, to predict, and to recommend organizations on the right size gift, the right time, and there are tools for that today. So you don't have to go into an ask blind anymore. You might, I know fundraisers are like, when I ask them before they're going, what are you going to ask? Well, we'll see how big his house is, or we'll see how many, what kind of art he has up in his thing. That's my strategy. Okay, so like 10 years ago, before data like that would be a decent strategy, kind of use your intuition. But today on the major gift side, there's just too much information for any philanthropy. I mean, the names keep changing, by the way. Major gift officers to philanthropy ambassadors. I can't keep up. But anybody who's responsible for bringing in large gifts should be using data to help them qualify and maximize their asks. In regards to the marketing team, and this is where today so many organizations' constituents live online, and using data to understand where their constituents are getting their information. So simple tools like having their cell phone number, so you can do mass texts, knowing where their social network, where their community is trending. Are they on Instagram? Are they on Facebook? Are they more professionals than in LinkedIn? So using data to just simply identify where they are, and then using data also for relationship science. Nonprofits grow organically. And, buying lists is not a thing, or opening up the Forbes and seeing the 500, richest people. That's not how it is. You grow through your existing organization, and using data to help you map those relationships, and using data to help you grow your organizations organically, right? So this person is on Twitter and he's got someone following him, and he potentially can introduce you to this person, or using data to, maybe on a deeper learning where like all these people went to the same school, or all these people, live in this area, or the data is telling us that these people are interested in these skills or have these interests, using that data for marketers to plan their campaigns, to find, social influencers, and so on and so forth. I hope that addresses some of your question.
Yeah, no, and you bring up a really good point that if the data is putting more work on your plate instead of giving you leverage, there's something wrong in your data strategy. And Wes, you even mentioned that in your intro, and I'd love to hear you speak on that. Like, how can you make sure that data strategy is giving you leverage? Because I think that's something every nonprofit leader that's wearing too many hats is worried about.
Yeah, sure. You can literally go out now with all the tools that exist and track everything. But is it important to you? And will it help make a difference? I think of some campaigns that I helped run where we were raising money for lots of different things within one organization. Think of university, and are we raising money for medicine or engineering or business? And really just even understanding what people care to give to and how they give can be incredibly important in how you approach them in the future. Keep in mind that the majority of most charities' revenue also comes from the people that they know, right? If I've given to you before, I'm more likely to give to you again. And if you're engaged, I'm more likely to be able to, secure larger gifts with you over time. And keeping people engaged means like understanding who they are. I think Regina had said it's the CRM that's the most important thing. And it's the most important thing because it is the centerpiece of the relationship between the donor and the organization. Without that relationship, you don't really have ongoing success. You can't say, well, I'm going to outperform last year. If you don't have those relationships, maybe you could do the same as you did the year before, maybe. So making sure that you're collecting the right kind of data that can inform future decisions. Sometimes some organizations will need one thing and another organization will need something completely different. So these are the ways that I like to think about, like, the data strategy is like, what are we trying to accomplish? What are the things that we need to do to get there, or that we need to know to be able to achieve those results? That's sort of, other than what has already been said, that's sort of like my angle on it.
Yeah, and it's really important because data is such an overarching, like, umbrella term to break it down into, like, first think about what actually is important to you so that you can action it. One thing that came up in the chat that I just wanted to talk about before we move on is Elizabeth asked, can you speak a little bit about prospecting versus privacy with regard to major gifts? And Arup, I don't know if you maybe can speak to that a bit around data sources, even for your own platform, and how people should think about managing those concerns.
Yeah, we take a pretty stringent approach here. We're not a list provider, so we don't have a lookup tool or anything else. The data has to be owned by you before you're actually able to get any of that information, the type of house, whatever else along those lines, the piece of art, right? That we kind of alluded to a little bit earlier, but. Effectively, nonprofits are also exempt from CCPA, although the other states and regulations are probably a little bit more nuance associated with it. So,
and could you just define, just in case anyone doesn't know what that acronym means?
Yeah, so it's the California Consumer Privacy Act. It was passed a couple of years ago. There have been additional versions of that that have gone into legislation, and probably some additional modifications that are coming up at the end of 2023 as well. But effectively, there's certain data that you cannot pull or source and then display it in terms of being able to protect the privacy of specific consumers. There's a lot of deep legislation around that. So if folks are focused on that, I would encourage you to probably look that up afterwards and probably spend a week of time kind of reading through all that fun stuff. But ultimately, that's kind of how we approach that privacy. And from a prospecting perspective, I 100% agree with, I think, what a lot of folks have said here, which is if you have folks already in your database that have either raised their hand or have given to you in the past or have attended an event, those are incredibly valuable prospects for you to ultimately go after. And so instead of, on the, for all of us on this panel, we sell to companies as well. And so ultimately trying to prospect into a new customer is like 5x more expensive than somebody that's already you have a relationship with and things of that nature. So for us, we're really focused more on what you've already collected and that organic growth that you might have already seen from your database or from the donors and prospects that you have from a constituent perspective. So that's kind of how our approach is versus the prospecting side. Now, of course, there are tools and solutions that do that. So we work really nicely with those folks, or we actually will reference other folks to go use some of the others that Regina mentioned in terms of the Wealth Engine, iWaves, and donor searches. Like we're not really in that same category. So ultimately, we're happy to kind of reference them to some of those folks.
Before we move on, if other people have anything to speak on with regard to privacy, because I do think that's obviously a big concern when people hear data and they start to get worried. Any other thoughts or considerations around managing that?
Yeah, I'll jump in here.
Go ahead, Regina.
I'll jump in. So I use, and I think most of us probably do, when I'm doing my prospect research and prospecting, I'm using publicly available information. So that's the one big piece. And then also I'm a member of APRA, which is the industry, the professional organization for prospect development. And they have very clear ethics outlined around donor privacy. And they also put out information on a regular basis to keep you abreast of what's going on. So I would encourage people to get connected with the professional organization that represents this work so that you can stay abreast of those things.
Yeah, and we'll link to that. Regina will connect afterwards to make sure the summary of this session has some links to that helpful info too. Sean, did you want to add in there?
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I think it's one of the powers of using machine learning and AI is we're feeding in a ton of PII. We purchase a lot of both publicly and non-public available data. We use it to feed into the algorithms, and that algorithm, when it comes out, has no PII tied to it. We've actually talked with some of our clients that are larger in their space, whether it's healthcare or veteran service organizations or whatever, that want to help other organizations. Now, no nonprofit would ever give away their donors. But if they can build a model for what a good monthly recurring donor looks like for a veteran service organization, and then be able to give that model to another nonprofit that has a whole bunch of first-time donors. We all know the statistic that 80% of first-time donors never come back. So a development team is wasting 80% of their time as they go talk to all these first-time donors. They can now take a model from a more mature organization that has no PII tied to it, be able to apply it to their first-time donors and really focus in on those donors who are most likely to stay with them because they have an affinity for their cause. That becomes really powerful and protects data, gives a lot more protection towards privacy.
I can add something to that. I think everyone has spoken about, sourcing the data from reputable locations and making sure, that we're getting publicly available data. No nonprofit is going to use a service that's going to, scrape the internet or use services that resell that data. That's a no-no. But I think also with what I've found in my experience is that also within the organization itself, not everyone has to see everything about everyone. It's private information. Yes, you did have opt-in, and yes, you didn't get it through a kosher, a source. But it doesn't mean that an intern or all your volunteers have to be able to go into your CRM system and see all this history and everything. And I think there's just it's an unwritten rule that there's just a general hierarchy of respect and insight of who needs to see what and what needs to see it and how they're going to use it, right? So there's having the data, and then there's how you're using the data. So it's just, I think every nonprofit has to establish a certain responsible hierarchy of who gets to see the data, how they get to, how they get to use it, and what, establishing some healthy limitations within the organization itself.
Oh, it's such a good point. Thank you so much for raising that. I think there's concern about prospecting and privacy, but I think a lot of people lose sight of all the stuff that you have in your own house. So making sure that that's safeguarded and you've got the right access codes and passwords and limitations on who gets to see what is incredibly important. So I'm really glad you raised that. One other thing that came up in the chat, Winfred was asking about the links. I just wanted to reiterate, if you take the survey at the end, we will have you on our list for the session and be able to send the summary direct to you, Winfred. So just make sure you do that. One thing I wanted, before we dig in deeper on the AI and machine learning that Sean brought up, because I know a lot of people want to understand better how that even works. With all of these tools that you can enrich your data with, which is kind of what all of you are offering to the market. So all of a sudden you get enriched donor data, and maybe you know what painting they own or whatever the information is. Then what? Like what do people really do? What's the call to action once you have a bit more of that information in your hands? And all of you will be able to speak to that. But maybe Wes, do you want to get going on that topic?
Yeah, sure. Our focus right now is on mid-level and major giving. And what we're doing is we're trying to help our clients treat donors based on not the last gift, but their next gift. Okay, so if we're helping Mitch, you make your donation. Your donation is $100, but we see that you've got $1,000 potential, and your next gift is going to be $500. We're then going to prompt a gift officer to actually just start stewarding you. Not necessarily keep you in their portfolio, but we're going to assign a task to our gift officer, Moisha, and say, okay, reach out to Mitch. thank him for his gift. And the reason why we do that is it's not always easy to get a gift officer to take time out of their busy day to start prospecting Mitch when Mitch had only made $100 gift. But what we have found is that, if they only have 10 minutes, they're actually likely to make that stewardship call. We found those stewardship calls actually start to build a relationship, and all of a sudden, half of those people end up in a portfolio. So we're always looking for ways to be able to turn some of these predictions into action. I think when I think of windfall data, for instance, I've toyed with their data. It's pretty cool. But looking at, someone's capacity helps you determine if it's worthwhile to spend time with them. Because in the end, you can achieve a meaningful gift. But if you don't understand what the engagement piece looks like, you could just be, chasing the wrong path because this person doesn't really care about your organization enough. So marrying those two types of things together help turn action into real results.
Yeah, and I think what you're touching on that's really important is, we talked about this earlier with leverage, but one of the biggest things that burns people out on your team is decision fatigue. So if you're constantly having to decide like who's the right next person to talk to, what do I talk about, you're making all those decisions yourself, you are giving a huge gift to your staff to take some of that decision making out of the way so they can really focus on executing, which I think is awesome. Anyone else want to jump in on just that next step CTA once you have the enriched data?
Yeah, Mitch, one of the things that I think is important is we run into a lot. I'm sure everyone else, especially when you say the word AI, most people picture the shiny silver head with red eyes coming at you. And if it's not that, you get people who are like, oh, they're trying to take my job. And one of the things we always stress is the most powerful form of AI is actually the human machine team. The machine is able to do things that would typically take a human weeks, if not months to do, and do it in hours, if not days. But what the machine will never be able to do is when, Mitch is identified as that next prospect through Wes as, hey, this is the next person to talk to. And the machine calls and says, how are you doing, very perfunctorily? And Mitch says, oh, well, I'm just getting through COVID. I've got a major board presentation next week and my mom's in the hospital. The machine's not going to care about any of that. It's going to know that Mitch is a product and it's going to ask. A good development director who is really good at maybe not data science, but at engaging donors is going to, sympathize with Mitch as they talk about sharing, having had COVID, empathize with him on his mother, and then follow up with him after the board meeting rather than asking for a donation, because now's not the time. And so that power of bringing together and allowing the machine, to your point, Mitch, on the fatigue, taking the fatigue away of spending hours and days and weeks going through spreadsheets and everything else, and letting the machine do that and allow the development team to do what they're good at, which is engaging and cultivating donors, just makes them much more powerful.
Awesome. And another question came up in the chat around recording of the sessions. Just wanted to reiterate to this user, yes, session will be available on LinkedIn and on YouTube. We host all those immediately afterwards. So you can check that out and share that with your teams for sure. I know Sean's mentioned a few times some stuff about AI, machine learning. I think it would be really helpful for the audience to just break down, like, when you say AI, what does that actually mean? Like, what actually happens? How does that work? If we could all demystify that a little bit for the audience. Moishe, I don't know if you want to take that first and we can pass around.
Sure. Well, I could, I could give the general definition and then talk a little bit about how we approach it. So AI or machine learning is basically doing what 1,000 development professionals would be able to do at scale. And it's taking tons of information, and depending on how sophisticated it is, and finding correlations and connections between this information to make predictions and recommend. And usually it leads into recommendations. So when you're on Amazon and you're just finished shopping and it recommends you to purchase this pair of jeans in this color, that's the machine taking a lot of information on you, maybe on other elements and other aspects. And it's just a ton of information, which technically a brain could do. But it just doesn't have that much processing power, meaning technically a brain can come up with that conclusion, but it doesn't have that much processing power to be able to make those predictions. And then it gets into just much more, it can get much more advanced, where you can, obviously do more black box things where you can feed, the machine of tons of information. And then the machine in and of itself, based on different outputs that you would like for the machine to come up with different predictions. So that's my rudimentary explanation of AI. The way we look at it with our company comes from a lot of from the background that I come from. So over the 8 years working at Charity, we were able to teach and learn from organizations about how to harness the power of the crowd, and to how to focus not just on the major gifts, but also on the every individual, the every person, and to be able to, knocking door to door to be able to find those gifts and get those $5 and $10 is not great, spending your time. But being able to create high value lists and segmentations of people who would be interested in something at scale. So using machine learning to go into, if you're an organization that has 100,000 people in your database, right? And you want to find the list of people who are most likely to respond to your marathon. So being able to study that information, and it could be as simple as just people, if you have the information, if they've done a marathon before, or if we can make correlate, tons of pieces of information, or they might be outdoorsy and they might be a perfect person to recommend doing a marathon for them. So it's being able to study all that information with a lot of processing power at a high level. That's how we look at it. So it's more about it is major gifts are important, but it's also about being able to harness the power of the everyday person, because we see today probably the single greatest perpetuator of, if that's even a word, I don't know if that's a word, perpetuator, of philanthropy is happening through peer-to-peer fundraising, especially, and that's where the data comes in from, and that's where a lot of new data is coming in from. So to be able to harness that data to identify the right people to take part in these campaigns, to introduce other people into these campaigns, is something that AI can be used for.
Awesome. And Wes, I'd love to hear a little bit behind the scenes too of how does this tech work for your company? Like, just to demystify a bit if it's scary to people.
Yeah, I mean, we've effectively built a model that works because we connect to a client CRM. So we connect to a client CRM, we ingest pretty much all the data, and we take some external data and append it. There are things like age that are a big predictor for giving, so we have a model that predicts age, and then every night we run our model. We check our results daily, and if the results are out of tune, we just retrain the next night. So we've kind of built an AI machine, if you will, that takes the structured data from a CRM and turns that into essentially action. And to kind of echo what we've heard, we want to be able to automate the intuition of a gift officer, and we want to be able to do that at scale. So I'm a smart gift officer. I've been doing it for 20 years. I can kind of look at a record and in 5 or 10 minutes have a pretty good plan. And that's a very repeatable thing that I can do with every donor in the database. But as soon as I have more than 100 donors to do that for, it stops making sense for an individual to do it. And we want to be able to take the smartest approach and apply that statistically to your entire history of relationships. So when we think about AI, it's about automating the intuition of a good fundraiser at scale. I think that's how I would describe it.
I love that. I love that.
Mitch,
And
can I take a quick? I was going to take one quick tangent, Mitch, which is, and it comes away from what we all focus on, which is fundraising. But there's an amazing application of AI programmatically. And if there are a lot of nonprofits listening, I don't want them to think AI is limited to fundraising. Two quick examples. United Refugee used to send teams of people out for months with big books and look face by face at refugees trying to match them. And now using a segment of AI known as facial recognition, they're able to go through and with 2-person teams and an iPad in a few days, make hundreds of matches. And ironically, it's going to help with your fundraising because most people who are major gift donors, they're used to investing. They're used to seeing an ROI. And if United Refugee is able to say, hey, it used to cost us $50,000 to match 12 people, and now with your $50,000, we can match 1,200 people, it's less of a giveaway of money and more of an investment that a donor is making. Teen Tech Suicide Hotline did the same thing. And one of the things, data helps take the human bias out of things. No matter how good a development director is, there's a bias about them. And when the Teen Tech Suicide Hotline was looking at all of their texts, they assumed that the mention of the word suicide or kill myself was what would indicate you needed to talk to that teen immediately off of text on the phone. And after looking at 5 years of data, they found that the word ibuprofen, the use of that, was actually a leading indicator to a teen about to do harm to themselves. And they were able to accelerate those calls to the top of the list and actually reduce the number of suicides that they saw. So there's a lot of amazing programmatic ways to further our missions. Although I know each of us is focused on how we use AI in fundraising, I just wanted to make sure that gets out there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, being able to demonstrate the use of technology to achieve your mission is the most helpful thing you could talk to those donors about. So there's such a duality there. Thank you so much for bringing those examples, Sean. And I think that's a good instance of technology usage in nonprofits. But I think a lot of times with donor data or enhanced donor data, there's trepidation around, are we ready? Like, is our organization ready to use a tool like this? Arup, and then maybe Regina can go next. I'd love to hear how you talk with clients or potential customers of like even assessing if they're ready to make the most of the tools or services that you offer.
Sure. Yeah, we do a lot of, and there's a lot of these resources are on our website at windfalldata.com. But I believe in a data maturity curve. So effectively, as you kind of think about your journey across the spectrum of, getting that CRM, getting that clean data, going through that process. If you want to do something like wealth screen, like AI ML is not actually appropriate for everybody. There's a lot of things that you can do that can be through segmentation, that can be through low-hanging fruit until you really need to get that other component. We usually think about that as the marriage of leveraging data and then augmenting that with the ML AI. And so ultimately, as you kind of think about that data maturity curve, it really, and for example, in the healthcare sector, we work with a lot of folks on grateful patients. And so effectively, when you look at that, if you don't have the infrastructure even activate that data, there's no point in actually going through the process of having a vendor like me. Like, it's not feasible until you're actually ready for that. And we say, great, like, let's talk in 3 to 6 months. And by the way, here's the path forward in terms of what you should probably at least be thinking about and when it was the right time for us to engage. So I think across the board here, I think we would probably all agree that ensuring that that any of our nonprofit partners are set up for success is really the critical component of leveraging the tools that you actually have available, and not just taking on a client when they're not ready for or guiding them down a path of MLAI and then saying what happens next, right? And so unless you have that tools for measurement success and kind of how you're going to measure that success afterwards, it really is kind of cultivates what path you should persist in terms of that ultimate journey. So I would probably take the clear takeaway of saying, hey, start with a solid foundation, then start to understand who are those folks in your constituent base first, then finally add in those sophisticated tools on top of it. Those are kind of the short steps that I would probably advocate.
Awesome. Yeah. And Regina, how have you seen that in practice with some of your clients?
Yeah, so I think maybe I differ a bit because my business is not like a search engine. And I'm not doing that functionality or offering that functionality for nonprofit organizations. What I often run into is organizations on just the beginning of their data journey. So they are nowhere near the point of like using AI to communicate with their donors or with their constituents or prospects. And so it is much more of identifying the data leaks. So maybe they've done I know an organization that's done this, and they're doing it right now. They're doing a fundraiser on Facebook, and they'll get lots of donations that way, but they're not then bringing that information into their CRM. That it just lives on Facebook. Oh, they love us there. But it's important to get that name, address, gift information so that we can then send it out for a screening, figure out what their true capacity is, figure out whether or not they are just annual fund or are they really major gift, are they transformational, are they principal giving. So really kind of working with organizations just at the start of that data journey. But Sean made a point that I find really interesting. On the program side, though, it's often very different. The program officers or the programming staff, no matter what the organization is, more often than not, they're using data to demonstrate, like, oh, we've fed X number of people. We helped X number of single moms with children. Oh, we changed the health outcomes for X number of babies, etc. They do that really well on the programming side, but not so well on the fundraising side, which I find that really interesting.
Yeah, and I think what you brought up is a great companion comment to Arup. It's almost like maybe at the very beginning of that data curve is like a diagnosis exercise. Where are there leaks? Where is there stuff we're missing? And getting your kind of data house in order and then moving up the curve. So thanks for bringing that up too. And something that Jamie just brought up is literacy around data hygiene, quality capture seems to be a really big challenge. Is there anything that any of you all tips you have, whether that's motivation or like how to find the time or how to engage staff around making sure they're doing this, or it's a part of the culture? If anyone has thoughts there.
The first thing that comes to mind for me would be your data capture forms. So whether or not it's your online giving form, a survey that you put on social media, I tell people often, whatever data you're missing, ask for it. Ask for it at the beginning. If you're missing it and you realize, oh, 1,000 of our records don't have this information, or 10,000 of our records don't have birth date information, come up with a strategy to reach out to your donors, deliver some impact story, explain to them why you want to strengthen the relationship, and ask for the missing information because you need it. You need it so that you can go to that next level. And the easiest way is right out the gate on your donor intake form. Capture what you need.
Yeah, it brings up a really good point too, Regina, that I meant to say earlier, which is avoiding either privacy infringement or even just bugging people, is asking people how they want to be like what's best. Do you like texting? Do you like coming to events? Do you like email? Do you want to follow us on social? And that's the best way to make sure you're engaging with someone on their terms, is they've told you. And I think a lot of organizations are afraid to bother people. And so it's a great point where there might be a gap in your data to not be afraid to just ask, and you're going to get really cool engagement around it. So thanks for bringing that up.
I think it's worth mentioning, Mitch, that a lot of people consider data hygiene to be a cost center, and it's something that they try to put off to save money. But if everything that we said today is true, and a good deal of your future success is dependent on the people that you know today, having good data hygiene there is really your investment to future revenue. You're giving it away if you lose track of where people live, for instance, or if you lose track of the relationship. So it is pretty common to hear people say, "Oh, I had to save money, so I wasn't, trying to clean my data this year," We didn't hire a data analyst, this kind of thing. So not a cost center. Please take that advice.
And I think it's a good answer, Wes, to the question of like, how do you make sure data literacy is a part of your organization? Invest, like train your people to understand that is not a cost. That is a really, really important investment in professional development. So it's a really good point to raise. Thank you. So we are inside of 10 minutes left. And I know I really want to get kind of like a last thought from everyone and go around the horn. So I'll just one more flag if there's any final questions in the audience. And otherwise, I would love to go around the group and just hear like a little future casting of, we've seen so much innovation. We've seen how these tools can be really helpful. What are you seeing as next? What's like on the horizon for you around nonprofit data science and practices that's exciting you most? And we can just go around the horn. So I'll go with Moisha next if you're ready to answer that one.
Sure. Well, I could say like this, we serve everyone on this call, we serve as a bridge, the bridge of the bridges, right? We help people help people. And ultimately, philanthropy and being a fundraiser is about finding what people are passionate about, right? And connecting them to the causes that can fulfill that passion, right? So the more we know about these people, we know about what they're passionate about, right? The more we can be able to serve them. And I think where the future is heading is because information is so available today, okay? In kosher ways, like I mentioned before, it would be a sin for organizations to not utilize the tools that can give them a full picture of who their donors are. And that's kind of the gap, the delta, right? It's like you have 100 people or organization, 3 of them because they're capable of giving you 50 plus $100 million gift. So you'd figure that's the only, good spend of your time. And then the rest of the 98% of the people get ignored. And where the future is heading is that because all this information is available, if you organize it in a proper way, if you use the tools to be able to use it in a proper way, you could get a deep understanding of what people are passionate about. If you do it in a smart way, you could be able to make those connections in a much more wise and a much more accurate way. And I think that's kind of where the greatest advantage of where data analysis and data intelligence is heading, to simply be able to minimize the distance between the person and his desire to change, the person and his desire to make an impact, to the cause and to the program that will actually fulfill that desire. And that's what all of this data intelligence is all about. It's about minimizing that distance. It's about connecting them to more intelligent, more wiser, more efficient ways to make an impact.
Definitely. Now, Wes, what would you add there?
I think part of the future is connected systems. So we know engagement is a big predictor on likelihood to give, gift amount, changing gift amounts, and social is a nice way to engage with people. We're not connecting social to CRM data in any effective way. A lot of us are not connecting, best-in-class systems to AI systems that derive a particular outcome. And I think as we become more
we just lost Wes there. We'll circle back to him, hopefully get some internet restored. Quickly, we did have a question come up in the chat that if any folks have an answer to. They were curious about how do you handle the difference between this goes to peer-to-peer fundraising, but the difference between influencers who might donate and the donor that's donating because of the influencer ask. So distinguishing like when is it connected to me or connected to the supporter themselves. I don't know if anyone has any feedback there.
I'll jump in. APRA Arkansas just did their spring conference last week and talked about this. And Marianne Pelletier. I'm mispronouncing her last name, but she spoke about this. And like in some ways, the research proves that it's the number of friends that your first connection has. It's not the first connection, it's the number of connections that they have that really matters. So that's really interesting. And in some ways, it doesn't matter how they come in. Once they're in, you need to steward them. You need to engage them. You need to figure out what's their capacity and develop a strategy around that capacity.
Awesome. Thanks, Regina. Sorry, Wes, if you want to wrap that up. We lost you for a second.
Oh, I have no idea where I left off. I was talking about the connectiveness of systems and the exchange of privacy for convenience that we all seem to do. There's going to be so much crazy data that's available, and when we start to use that smartly in a good, and we'll call it private or ethical way, it's going to have a big impact on results.
Absolutely. Arup, where are things going? What's big on your horizon from the Windfall perspective?
Yeah, I would probably think about we're always consistently on a journey to make sure that data accuracy quality is consistent. So I don't think that we should lose sight of like what's next. I think it's maintaining that you also are able to keep the tools active and valuable. Data does have decay associated with it. So again, before looking too far in the future, maintaining the efficacy is probably the most important thing that all institutions need to do. That being said, I don't think it's dissimilar to what Wes mentioned. And when you said connected systems, I started thinking about workflows. So ultimately, in terms of the implementation associated with different tools that folks are leveraging, how do those all kind of flow together? And that's the activation that you really mentioned a little bit earlier in terms of, well, what do you do with the data afterwards? If you don't have those workflows, those activation layers, then it's really not useful at all. And so being data-driven means actually utilizing workflows, in my opinion. And so ultimately, I think that's where the entire industry is starting to shift.
Really important. Thank you, Arup. Sean?
Yeah, I would say if there's lemonade to be made out of the lemons of the pandemic, it's that nonprofits have accelerated more around the technology adoption curve in the past 2 years than they had the past 2 decades. And so for me, that's very exciting because, 3 years ago, if an executive director walked into the office and saw their development director trying to make a major gift pitch on Zoom, that major gift officer would have been fired. Today, you have executive directors asking why they need to take someone out to dinner when they could just do it on a Zoom call. And so we've seen our community become more accepting of technology and the power that it brings. And what I love hearing is, 5 years ago, it was all about capacity. Who's the wealthiest person, and let's go after those people. Well, the reality is, if you take a look at the $450 billion that was donated, it was broken into thirds. A third was corporate foundation, a third was major gifts, and a third was the non-major gift donors. There's a lot more of the non-major gift donors than there are major gift donors, and we have been focused on them. And now when you hear, Wes talking about how while they do major gifts, they're focused on that middle tier. And we can start focusing on monthly recurring donors. We can focus on people who grow with the organization. You can start to look at all those bigger pool of people and really start to energize them, which is going to drive more dollars into an organization, which is going to allow them to meet their missions more efficiently. So that to me is leveraging the technology to push that forward, both programmatically and from a fundraising perspective. I think exciting for our community.
Awesome. Yeah. And Regina, if you could bring us home, what are you most excited about right now in this space?
I'm excited about the potential. I'm excited about the way that we can harness data to make real change and impact in our world.
Oh, short and sweet and right under the wire there, keeping us inside of an hour. Thank you so much, everyone. This was a great, great conversation. We could probably do this for hours. As I mentioned, this is hosted by Pond. Anyone here that fills out our survey at the end, you'll get $50 in your account just for attending, which is amazing. So you can find that on our webinar page on our site. We really appreciate the feedback, and we really appreciate everyone who came today and joined the conversation. We'll have recaps. This will be turned into a podcast. The webinar will be available on YouTube. You can find it lots of places to share. So thanks again.
I want to thank Sean for the sunrise. Thank you, Sean. That was beautiful.
Yes.
Now they're going to have virtual backdrops that are like evolving horizon lines over the course of a conversation. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.